Welcome to all the speakers and the delegates for this instruction course on titled Swimming with Shark. Basically, it's about troubleshooting the challenges that you encounter in the vitreoretinal surgery. The speakers for today are myself, Dr. Rajaram Reddy from Neuretina, Hyderabad, Dr. Deependra Vikram Singh from Delhi, Gurgaon, IQ Hospitals, Dr. Joshi from Hubli, MM Joshi Eye Hospital, and Dr. Rajiv Reddy from LV Prasad Eye Institute, Hyderabad. Okay. The format will be, I request all the speakers to keep their video as well as audio on all throughout this presentation because after each case there will be brief question will be asked about how will you go about managing this case. So I request all of them to keep your video as well as audio on all through the session. Yeah. Okay. Okay, the first case is of a 60-year-old female with no history of any systemic illness. Was present. She has a grade 1 macular hole. She was posted for a combined cataract as well as vitrectomy surgery. Cataract surgery was uneventful, and 25 gauge pars plana vitrectomy was planned for the macular hole. Soon after a PVD is the video clear to all? If there was any lag?
No, sir, not much. Now it has little lag.
Yeah, soon after the PVD induction, we see that there is a inferotemporal area. There is a mound here that very suspiciously looked like a retinal detachment because it occurred soon after a PVD induction. And I was trying to indent and see the retinal periphery, the causative break. Meanwhile, the bulla extended, increasing in extent. So PFCL was injected, thinking it's a retinal detachment to manage the retinal detachment. And the amount is increasing. Now I realize it's not a retinal detachment anymore. It is a supraparietal hemorrhage. Okay, there is a. So at this time, the goal was to close the globe completely, close the globe and secure all the wounds. Okay. Now, the question for the panel will be, do you agree with the initial management on this particular case of indentation looking for a retinal break, especially to Dr. Rajiv Reddy and the PFCL injection? Do you have done any differently in this case? Dr. Rajiv?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I clear?
Yeah, you can hear.
So whenever we see a mound, the first thing I would check is the cannula. First thing, I would not search for the break first. I will search for the cannula, whether the cannula is inside or not. The second thing which I would see is in case if there is a mound which is increasing, I would still suspect a suprachoroidal first rather than retinal detachment, especially when you are still in the stage of induction of PVD. It's very unlikely for such a big detachment to happen without even doing anything. So you can create a break, but then creating such a big detachment is very unlikely.
Okay. Now this particular patient underwent did not have any high risk factors that you see for expulsive hemorrhage like high myopia, previous RD surgery, or buckling, or cryopexy, or anything. This particular patient was taken up for a resurgery after 15 days, and you can see that the PFCL, that is 20 gauge ports, were made to that are there to be drained out, although there were no choroidals in ultrasound. So PFCL is still remaining. Brilliant blue dye was injected, and again a retinal periphery indentation was done to look for any retinal breaks because this was planned to be closed with a gas. Okay. Now the question will be that this particular case, the orooctane was used to used safely inside the eye for about 15 days. So is it a time for us to use as a orooctane as a short-term tamponade? Has anybody tried leaving it inside the eye for a 15 days period?
Yes, Dr. Raja sir, I have tried in cases of GRTs and in case of inferior breaks where it is not settling. I have left it for around 10 days and it was very well prescribed by, published also by Dr. Steve Charles. He termed it as a midterm PFO.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering that have you used any our Indian available orooctane product is left inside the eye?
I have left it for around 10 days, not 15 days, but 10 days also gave good results as well. But sometimes we do see the migration of these PFO bubble in the trabecular meshwork if left for a longer time. And in the pseudophakic patients, I have seen these bubbles coming up in the AC as well.
Okay.
So if it comes in the AC, that is pretty much sure that it might go and occlude into the trabecular meshwork anywhere. So I would rather do it in a phakic eyes and where there is no zonular dehiscence, where there is no PFO coming into the anterior segment.
Okay, I think this is a good take-home point. I think we can start probably in a rare circumstances we can start using this. Yeah, this is how the patient healed subsequently is recovered a good vision of 618. There's another case of proliferative diabetic retinopathy is presented to us, and after lasering of a couple of months, this has come up with a mild subhyaloid hemorrhage, and then one fine day she comes with a sudden decrease of vision following a submacular hemorrhage along with a subhyaloid hemorrhage. So the question to Dr. Deepender is, how frequently do you see subretinal hemorrhage in case of proliferative diabetic retinopathy? How often do you, how often do you find any cause like any retinal break or probably through which the Dr. Deepender?
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, I think it's quite rare to have a subretinal hemorrhage from proliferative diabetic retinopathy. But if you see one, it almost always tells you that probably there is a retinal break at the base of neovascular complex. And this is more so if it's a post-operative case. It's almost a dictum that your diabetic surgeries, vitrectomy surgeries should not result in subretinal hemorrhage. If you see subretinal hemorrhage means there was a break which can be iatrogenic, but if you are seeing it pre-operatively, then that means it's a spontaneous break and it's going to be a secondary regmatogenous sooner or later.
Thank you. I literally scanned all this area to look for any break. I couldn't find one. This patient was posted for surgery, and you can see that after this is how it is there. After vitrectomy, membrane peeling, and this is how the subretinal hemorrhage at this point of view. Somehow during I tried by staining with brilliant blue under air, the intraoperative cataract has progressed. Almost a feathery TSC. There was no lens touch, and it has progressed so far that the stage of subretinal tissue TPA was planned to be injected in this particular patient. It was difficult in this patient, so silicone oil was injected, and at the end of surgery, under the silicone oil, you can see that subretinal TPA was injected, sort of in the compromised circumstances. Now the question to Dr. Joshi would be that what exactly how frequently do you see this kind of a case where there is rapid progression of intraoperatively of feathery cataract during the surgery? Just to tell you that this particular patient, a new pack was opened and Alcon BSS was used.
The length of the surgery, what is the length of the surgery?
It was normal. I mean, it's like 25 minutes, the membrane peeling was completed.
Yeah. I have never come across any of these cases forming so early rosette kind of cataract, unless it is an air filled where we are trying to laser it under the air when we do a fluid air exchange and do it. But yes, under fluid, suddenly going in such kind of things. Of course, I have seen a lot of corneal edema being developed or the epithelial edema where we try to scrape the epithelium. But going in for the cataract, that too in an intact posterior capsule, I have never come across such cases till now.
Yeah, Dr. Deepinder, about your opinion, because in this some amount of surgery to say was done under air, like plain blue dye was injected towards the end after membrane peeling done to stain the ILM peeling, and probably some amount of interface vitrectomy under air. Like probably say, for about 5 minutes, not
I
more.
think, Dr. Reddy, before air, it's extremely rare to have intraoperative feathery cataract. But yes, once you have switched on the air, a lot of us have seen these temporary cataracts, feathery cataracts, which disappear. You put silicone oil, it looks like that this patient will require a cataract surgery in next 4 weeks, and then suddenly in next 10 days you find that they are doing well, lens clears up. I've seen a pediatric patient there being operated under GA where he also developed similar cataract, and but surprisingly, I think he didn't require surgery for 6 months. But I think what air can do, I think BSS stream can also sometimes do, even if there is not direct lens hit. Sometimes stream and maybe that spraying of that BSS can also induce. Ultimately, it's just the change in that osmolarity of the contents of the lens.
What I thought is that most of these cases, the next you tell the patient that you may be requiring cataract surgery sooner, and we realize that on the first post-operative day, there is no cataract at all. They resolve also pretty soon, as fast as they develop. This has been my experience in a couple of cases. And this is how it was there on the second post-operative day. This particular patient, the tissue, the hemorrhage is resolved, the subretinal hemorrhage. And there's another interesting case of a 31-year-old male who has decreased vision in 2 weeks. He is referred to uvea cleaners as a toxoplasmosis, and the treatment also initiated, but there was literally no change in the picture, neither worsening nor improvement. I mean, this is how the OCT through the lesion at this point looked like. And this is how the ultrasound looked like. There is a membranous hyperreflective structure at that area. And in the vitreous cavity, the vitreous cells are around that area. What could this be, Dr. Rajiv? Any idea? This particular case patient?
See, toxo is one possibility. Other possibilities are ARN also can present like severe inflammation with something like this. And if there is subretinal abscess, there's another one which can present something like this. And especially the elevation which you're seeing, so that could be a subretinal abscess.
Yeah. Dr. Joshi, any questions?
Yeah.
The same line. This particular patient is not in the retinal periphery. It was somewhere in the equatorial region. So what this patient underwent vitrectomy, and final diagnosis is the case of a Valsalva maneuver induced subayloid hemorrhage around the equator region. There was nothing else that could have. It was a hemoglobinized.
So you mean to say that was the breakthrough vitreous hemorrhage?
Yes, there's a breakthrough vitreous hemorrhage, and the actual cause is probably a Valsalva maneuver induced subayloid hemorrhage. But classically, instead of seeing the premacular area, that was somewhere in the slightly beyond the arcades.
I had a very similar case where our colleagues, few of our colleagues, fellows were treating it like a uvea patient only, like vitritis. And then later on, we got to know that it was an altered hemorrhage. And again, it was probably because of Valsalva retinopathy, because rest nothing was there. And I don't know how B-scan we can actually, it was not very conclusive. I had a very similar case as well, where even the Valsalva retinopathy, almost 2 months he was investigated every possible thing in uveitis. And then we went ahead. I somehow had a doubt that it should come down, at least with so much of steroids and everything, anti-toxo treatment, what all treatment they started on him. But that vitritis probably should have come down. If it doesn't come down, then I think we have to think of any other alternative of going in and at least doing a biopsy or trying to see what is there inside.
Anytime when you see a vitritis type of a picture, yes, old heme is a differential diagnosis which can happen. If it's a fresh heme, you will not see something like this. But if the patient had this before for some time, and then you will definitely confuse it with the pictures like inflammation. But whenever you are in doubt, obviously the first choice is to clear that blood and clear the vitreous and see what's happening there.
Exactly.
But can you go back to the OCT which you were showing?
Yes. OCT also, it gives a slight indication that it could be probably in the pre-retinal space or highlight.
No, but no, it could be a pre-retinal, but what we are seeing here is you see the choroidal vessels there in this, in the area which is normal.
Yeah.
There are large choroidal vessels there.
The next case is case of a combined phacoemulsification macular surgery in a 62-year-old male. And this is how it looked in the 5-day post-op. The edges were opposing and patient was asked to lie in a sideways position. And later on when he reviewed at the end of 1 month, this is the kind of picture that we see, a severe cystoid macular edema. Dr. Dipender, any experience of during this combined surgeries, and what would you do encountering CME in the combined surgeries, Dr. Dipender?
I think I have not seen unusual CMEs when I combine cataract surgeries with the macular surgeries. But yes, they are a known complication of cataract as well as vitrectomy surgeries. And I think you have to look for cells, and maybe sometimes you can have a disc leak also in these patients.
The phaco was uneventful in the post-op. Course was uneventful.
Yeah.
This is how the patient like 2 weeks after diagnosis.
I think, Dr. Reddy, we are not able to hear you clearly, or maybe I am the only one who is not able to.
This is the picture after 2 weeks. What would you do now at this stage, Dr. Dipender?
I think you had a strong suspicion of cystoid macular edema, so we'll definitely try steroids, either topical or maybe periocular or intraocular, depending on what you do in your practice. But we'll not jump for any surgical intervention that early. Even if I realize that it's a refractory macular hole, I would wait for 4 to 6 weeks before attempting a resurgery. And steroids are our best friends in these situations.
Yeah. After 2 weeks of diamoxin, as there was no response, PST was given, and this particular patient responded beautifully well and recovered good vision. Yeah. The next case is of a 65-year-old male who underwent a vitrectomy and silicone oil 5 years back for an RRD, and underwent silicone oil removal. And he also underwent a ILM peeling FGA for a macular hole that he developed 3 years after RRD surgery. He has recently come with a decreased vision in this only seeing guy. The vision dropped to 612 and N10, and this is the kind of picture that we see in this one-eyed patient. Dr. Rajiv, what would you do in this particular patient?
There is the epiretinal growth which is happening there in this again. So I would definitely consider removing that, and then putting gas would help to a certain extent.
Dr. Joshi,
it looks like a LHEP kind of thing, the lamellar hole epiretinal proliferation. Although it is a wrong terminology to call it as a lamellar hole, because the same LHEP has already been described even in the macular hole cases as well. So it's actually a misnomer, but definitely it's an epiretinal proliferation there. And I don't think any of the graft or anything is required. It's a pretty small hole, and it's like an open door kind of sign. So once we remove the epiretinal membrane secondarily and just try to tease a little bit and do a fluid exchange with the gas, I'm sure that these holes will be closing pretty well.
But this was a reopening of an already closed hole. I was a bit hesitant in this particular patient, and I thought we'll wait for some time, 2 weeks. I put it on topical Nevenac, and this is how you see.
You can definitely wait for a macular hole to close. There's no doubt about it. But in case if it's not closing even after waiting, the good idea is to remove that epiretinal proliferation.
Luckily for this patient, and this visit is happy that his vision is also improved.
So, Dr. Reddy, I have a small, quick question to Dr. Srinivas and Dr. Everybody. Dr. Srinivas rightly pointed out that LHEP is, I think now should be called MDEP, macular dehiscence associated epiretinal proliferation. So if you see this LHEP like findings in a full thickness macular hole, let's say it's a fresh macular hole, would you consider removing or avulsing it, or would you be going for a foveal sparing and a flap kind of surgery?
Sir, I have done around 3 or 4 cases with LHEP associated macular hole, or what
Yeah.
you said, the new terminology. So
Yeah.
what I do is I just try to bring it to the center and then try to trim it off, because they are
Yeah.
so adherent, especially at the edges of the hole. The moment we try to peel it, I have burnt my fingers in few of the cases where the hole size enlarged. So what I'm doing is I'm just bringing it to the center and just trimming it and leaving it away. It goes in the macular hole, but unfortunately some amount of scarring might develop because it's a proliferation, and the proliferative cells is anyhow required to close the hole. So in these cases, we don't see any good visual improvement rather than a good anatomical improvement.
Yeah, I agree with Srinivas that we don't try to peel it off like an ILM that you peel off completely, but you need to see where the stronger attachment, you may have to just trim it off there.
Yeah, this then going to the next case is a rhegmatogenous retinal detachment. The case is an intraoperative challenge that we see around indentation vitrectomy is being done, and let's take it to a point where it is there. Yeah, this time retinotomy is done. During the air fluid exchange part, we see that the silicon tip is dislodged from the tip, the green tip, and is like, Dr. Joshi, how would you manage this particular case if you see this kind of a challenge?
Even I have faced it many a times. This happens when we reuse these instruments again and again, but I have seen it happening in the fresh tube itself. So I have complained this to Alcon, that what is the stability of your things. And in the recent one session, Dr. Anand Rajendran was showing the chip of the cutting blade, the vitrector. It came out and it fell and it went into the macular hole as well. So probably what we see is the reusability of these, or the cleaning of these, are not properly done by our OT technicians. And again, it can be removed by any other kind of thing. Some people try to use a smaller thing and sleeve it inside it, and it can be removed, or just remove it like any other foreign body removal with any of the forceps.
Showing this video was that this can be cut and there's no need to literally remove it like a foreign body.
Achha, it got cut, is it? You could do it with a cutter?
Yes, you do it with the cutter.
Oh, great.
So you can see that there is at the vitreous base. That's it. Yeah. So even if we have a silicone tip material, because it's black, we can easily cut it and then do the rest of the thing. Dr. Deepender, have you encountered this kind of situations before?
I think surprisingly not yet, but now I know a lot of tips, so I am ready for it. But so far, no.
Good. Yeah, these are other cases of post-Ozurdex endophthalmitis. Unfortunately, that has happened in case. Now we're trying to remove the Dex implant with a cutter. Some of the challenges that we see here are like this: that that material is not. It is constantly repelled by the cutter, and the question to Dr. Deepender would be, what would you really do to your vitrectomy settings to see things that happen, and whatever material apart from vitreous, if you're planning to cut in the with the cutter, those that stays put close to you. I mean, if it is a nucleus, it stays adherent, and there's no, you change the duty cycle or something like that to help you in the ease of surgery, Dr. Deepender?
Yeah, I think we used to do when we were doing 23 gauge surgeries, even with Constellation. And our 20 gauge experience has also taught us that you reduce the cutting rate. And I think in Constellation, you can go to core mode, where, the amount of time the port is open increases, unlike the shave mode. So these things do make a difference. And otherwise, I think you can just do what you do with a nucleus fragment. You switch off the cutting, engage the piece, and then maybe with your second instrument just feed this implant into the cutter. almost just like you are removing a nuclear fragment. Otherwise, this happens with nuclear fragment also, especially if you have fiddled it with too much, it loses all its sharp edges, so becomes difficult to grasp.
Dr. Rajiv, would you suggest some tips to handling decks you're trying to do it better? Can you change in the settings, change the duty cycle to help you?
Whenever I'm doing a lensectomy, I'll reduce my cut rate to sort of 1,000 or even less sometimes, and increase the suction rate. So that's the only thing which I do, and that's good enough for me to avoid all this.
Yeah. Would you like to add anything, Dr. Srinivas?
I missed the initial part of the video. What was it for the Ozurdex injected?
For a PDR with DME.
So why do you want to remove it?
Because it's an end of.
Endophthalmitis.
Srinivas is a case of
End of vitrectomy. Okay, of
But
course.
even then, I think if it is a fungal end of, I think
Yeah.
that's a very good question actually.
I would rather hold it in one hand, complete the vitrectomy, put the oil, and retain that steroid fragment if it is not a KOH, if it is come as KOH negative.
no, as it is a post-injection endophthalmitis, we directly went in for surgery. We do not have the comfort of.
No, I'm not contemplating about the surgery. Surgery has to be done, and the end of the things has to be removed it, because most of these cases, when we use bacterial endophthalmitis, we do inject the dexamethasone at the end so that the inflammation comes down. Of course, in the OT, I send it to my lab. Once they confirm me that it is KOH negative, along with the intravitreal antibiotics, I always try to put in the dexamethasone as well. So anyhow, I would rather chosen of keeping it if it's a bacterial endophthalmitis.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Srinivas, and because we were not sure about, we couldn't rule out fungal, then maybe you were justified in removing. But I encountered similar situation when there was DME and a nucleus drop and Ozurdex implant. So in situations like this, where you know that inflammation is now going to exacerbate macular edema, so it's better to retain it. But maybe if you are suspicious of fungal, then I think, and then you may not know that implant itself might be carrying the, it might itself be infected. That's again, I don't know whether it is described yet or not, but that might be the concern of the surgeon.
Yeah. The next case will be a case of a pathological myopia with traction. This particular patient was taken up for a vitrectomy, and this is how the plan was: vitrectomy and iLM peeling, both dye, triamcinolone, as well as Glen blue dye was doing, because there's not good take-up of the dye with this particular patient. So with the triamcinolone assisted membrane, the vitreoschitic membrane or whatever it was peeled. The difficulty in seeing where exactly is the fovea in this particular patient.
I think there is a delay in the internet of Dr. Raja Rami Reddy's.
The video is not clear, Dr. Joshi?
No, it
So
is
now-
coming,
now
but
we can
there
see
is a lot of lag. No problem. Go ahead, sir, please.
So the post-operatively, she was doing pretty good for a month or so, resolving fluid. But after 2 months, we see this kind of a picture. Now, Dr. Joshi, I mean, how would you manage at this point of time?
Sir, just a half an hour back, we had the same discussion, especially in this myopic foveoschisis where there is the staphyloma in the posterior pole. Just doing vitrectomy or even ILM sparing or fovea sparing, ILM peeling, any of these. I just burnt my hands just 2 weeks back where I did a vitrectomy because the vision dropped from 6.6 to 6.12 and it was bulged like this with a lamellar hole. So I thought, let me go ahead, release the traction of the vitreous, induce the PVD, and then did a fovea sparing ILM peeling. Patient had 6 parts vision post-op for 3 months. Now I see him, it is like this, he's 660. one-night patient, 70-year-old. Again, I went inside to see where did the SRF come from. So I put a PFCL, the fluid went into the mid periphery. I had to do a drainage retinotomy, do a laser there. And till today, he is just 6/60 with the oil. He's so unhappy. And I feel in such cases, probably the macular buckle will help, sir. Because vitrectomy alone in myopic foveous cases with posterior staphyloma, just vitrectomy alone will definitely burn our hands, according to me. Other panelists to please suggest.
Tender, or how would you manage this particular patient at this?
I think I'm still not able to get, you have done the vitrectomy and ILM peeling, everything, and this has now opened up.
Yeah, there's a new hole formed after 2 months. Yeah, it was this.
I think given the resources and the skills which we are versed with currently, we are not doing macular buckles, so maybe grafting can be a option here. Maybe autograft, auto-retinal graft, and especially if this is single-eyed patient and
Dr. Rajiv, how would you manage this?
there is a macular hole associated detachment also. If it was just an open macular hole, I would have left it, but if it is a detachment, posterior pole detachment in one eye. And another thing we would do is do a very densely packed raster to look for other holes also. Sometimes there is another hole which creates a detachment and then opens up the macula.
So, you're absolutely right in that.
Yeah.
Rajiv, you would like to add? I mean, how would you particularly manage this case?
No, I would definitely look for another hole because myopies are known to have tiny holes which are difficult to identify whenever you are doing surgery. And if you are able to find, it's fine. If not, macular buckle will definitely be a better option, at least in this.
Sir, do you suggest a macular buckle only in cases where there is posterior staphyloma just underneath the fovea, or in any cases of myopic foveous cases?
No, I don't think we need to put a macular buckle in every one, but especially if it is there in the macula with involving the center area, so then I would say prefer macular buckle. The peripheral or nasal areas, I usually don't prefer to do that.
This particular patient, it happened, I was not in a maintained prone position, and this is how luckily the retinal detachment part is taken care of. But anyway, the hole is there. This is how the patient maintained for the next 4 years. He underwent cataract surgery. So I think, once in a while try, in some cases of simple gas injection may be of help before we go inside and do a major surgery, this thing like something like that. Now, this is another case of a recurrent RD post siliconol removal, and the cause of detachment is a macular hole that was not existing before. This patient was taken up for surgery. Yeah, and the challenge that we encountered in this particular patient was that obviously the plan was to inject PFCL and do ILM peeling under PFCL for this patient. The challenge was that PFCL could not exactly flatten the retina because whatever subretinal fluid that was there, it did not have any escape route for it to. More PFCL was injected, but you can still see that that particular is not flattened of silicon because there's no other break that through which the subretinal fluid can undergo. Dr. Rajiv, how frequently you see this, and how do you what would you do in this kind of situation?
I usually don't use a PFCL to do an ILM peeling in macular hole, even if there is an RD.
Macular hole with a retinal detachment.
Yeah, even with retinal detachment. So you start on a nasal area, you'll still be able to peel it off without having much problem. And even if you want to put a PFCL, you don't need to flatten the whole retina completely because it's just to stabilize that retina. So a small bubble is good enough for you to get that done.
Not exactly comfortable in doing it in that kind of situation. So, I did a. 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 I d retinotomy there. And once retinotomy is done and fluid is removed, now you can see that the rest of the retina is flattens out very well. And it's not and, yeah. Now it's good. Now, Dr. Deepender, I mean, would you have done anything differently in this particular kind of patient, or how would you go about?
I think almost a similar way, but partly I agree with Dr. Rajiv that I also initiate ILM peeling in this situation without PFO, create a good enough flap, and then I start mobilizing flap under PFO, because I think somehow I feel peeling under PFO is more traumatic. If there is a pre-existing break, another peripheral break, so I always will drain SRF to reduce the height, but not in high myopic eyes. Sometimes it's good to have that height of detachment at macula. It will make your forceps, go reach ILM easily.
It's not such a high myope, and the only problem is, because it's a detached retina, it's actually slightly more comfortable to do under PFCL. I mean, no, you're especially when you're planning an inverted ILM peeling, I would say. Dr. Srinivas, any?
Sorry, I try to do under PFCL itself, like how you have done. I try to make a drainage retinotomy in the periphery. Initially, I used to do ILM peel in a detached retina. It's more easier. But the thing is, I don't know whether it's enlarging the hole sometimes by pulling it. Here, the PFCL acts like a third hand. It tries to give the pressure. So it's almost like in a stabilized retina and trying to do an ILM peeling rather than inadvertently, if you try to pull it in the wrong direction in a detached retina, I feel that might be more traumatic. Anyhow, it's just my suggestion, but I agree with you, Dr. Raja sir. I inject PFCL and do a peripheral drainage retinotomy, do an inverse ILM flap, and I never try to drain anything with the hole at all, macular hole.
Now the patient has done very well after surgery. The next case is of a macular hole of this configuration, and also has a cataract. Yeah, he was posted for a combined surgery, cataract and combined cataract and vitrectomy. The challenge in this particular case was that intraoperatively, you see we missed a diagnosis of proliferative diabetic retinopathy. You can see that there are new vessels in the retinal periphery in the screen. So this is an important thing that one should look into the periphery to. Does your management change at this point of time, Dr. Rajiv? How would you have done differently if you see a PDR intraoperatively in case of a macular hole? This particular case, it was missed because of this thing. Would you change anything?
Anytime I see a break in diabetic patient, I would stay away from the macular or hole or any hole and try to dissect off the peripheral membranes wherever they are available there where without causing much of a retinal detachment to increase. And second thing I would do is I would go for a bimanual surgery whenever there is a break which is causing a even localized retinal detachment, because the more you try to dissect there, it will keep on increasing.
Luckily for this patient, there was no fibrous membranes. It was just flat NVEs, dried out NVEs that we can see that was seen. So with the PVD induction, we only created hemorrhages, as we can see in the video, at all places where there were NVE, and we could safely do it. Dr. Deepender, would you have done anything differently?
I think not much, but I think this goes without saying when we are inducing our PVD. So it's always a good idea to use passive vacuum once you have initiated the PVD and you have detached it from disc. So the moment you find resistance when you reach equatorial area, so you have to be really cautious. And these less aggressive PDRs have more peripheral NVEs. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's more important that when you are crossing equatorial area, try to leave it and then maybe trim it from outside and leave those islands of NV with vitreous attached on that and do good PRP. I think nothing much different. Of course, I'll evaluate the fellow eye on day one.
Hello. Yeah, day one and evaluated. We did FFA after 1 week. We saw that there were subtle NVs in the fellow eye as well. This particular patient was lucky in the sense that PVD induction was okay. I mean, there were no retinal tears, and laser was done around areas where there was a capillary ooze, and she went on to do well after vitrectomy. This is how the patient behaved post-operatively. Yeah. Now I think I'll pause here for some time. I request Dr. Rajiv, you can present your cases.
Okay.
How much time do we have, Dr. Raja sir, each speaker?
You need to stop
We
sharing.
have another,
Pardon?
yeah, we have another 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Stay till 1:55.
Okay, 45 minutes. Okay, fine. So 10 minutes per speaker, sir. So, okay, fine.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. We are able to see it, sir.
Yeah.
Rajiv.
Well, no,
So this is a case with micro-ophthalmos microcornea with coloboma and lens, which was hard. So I was doing a using a fragmatome to get the lens out, and we realized something else happened there. Did you notice what happened there? So I didn't notice at that point of time, but then I tried again using it, but then it was not working. So then I realized that fragmatome has got broken and then was staying there inside there. So that's what I encountered. So have you seen something like this, and how did you manage?
I think I haven't seen anything like this, but I think it's we have to manage it like a foreign body. I mean, there's no other option, I think, to cut it inside the eye. I mean, you have to literally have a good foreign body forceps that can grab it. I mean,
So fortunately, it was 20 gauge, so I don't have to worry much about it. So what I did was that's the broken end of the fragmatome piece, which I was showing there. So I used a regular membrane forceps. I went there. So that's the difficulty which I was finding, because whenever you move, the whole thing was moving out. So that's how I grabbed it and tried to pull it off through the same sclerotomy which I had made. So I just had to extend it a little more because it was not coming out well. So I used another MVR from other hand and extended a little more and then try to pull it off, because that's exactly fitting the fragmatome, and then the forceps and fragmatome was not coming out together. So that's something which sort of scary at some point of time when fortunately it was a colobomatous area, so it went and hit there, didn't create much problem. I lasered the coloboma anyway at the end of surgery.
that was a good video, Dr. Rajiv. I haven't seen.
So that's one. So this is what we were talking about, myopic patients. So this patient had a detachment. This is a nasal detachment. You can see the CNVM here in the macular area, but this is the whole detachment, the localized pocket, which is seen nasal area. So we went in and trying to find a break. We did a vitrectomy induced PVD. So what I did was I stained using Brilliant Blue, so to see if I can identify if there is any defect anywhere. So if you notice here, there is a small area where it is actually not stained well, right next to the disc. So once I cleared the Brilliant Blue, I went in and zoomed it again to see what's happening there. Because there was no detachment in the periphery, so there was no question of peripheral break being there. So we knew clearly that the break is there in that posterior area. So we had to find it. So that is the area. I'm not cauterizing it. I was just showing it that you can actually put their diathermy probe inside that area where there is a break. But unfortunately, that is the area where there is an atrophy. So there is no question of doing a laser. I tried seeing if they can get a fluid out using a 39 gauge needle, but it didn't. So I used a regular flute needle to drain that area and settle the retina there. So this case I actually left with gas inside without putting in oil. So how many would you prefer a gas or oil in this?
Sir, Rajiv sir, in the first instance, why the surgery was done, sir? Because there was decline in the vision?
So there's a decline in the vision. A patient was complaining of a problem in one area which is not seen. So it was not there before. This was an old patient of ours, and then patient had a CNVM. So you see that there is a CNVM which is active, and there was a bleed also.
Okay.
Not reactivated. We were giving injections, and this is what we noticed later on. So the patient developed PVD and then developed this.
But Rajiv, now that you have done a vitrectomy, I mean, intravitreal injections do not work so well also. I think
I know, but there is not much of an option.
But I think, Dr. Rajiv, I think I would still like to treat it like a coloboma, unless you are 100% sure that that was the only break. And if you have like gone in, I would do a total barrage laser around whole this atrophic area. You never know, there can be more than one breaks. And I think Dr. Srinivas had a very good point, observation that we could have observed it, and if RD goes beyond staphylomatous area, then also we could have considered surgery.
Correct.
And maybe pre-operate, just during observation, you could have done that barrage, just like we do for coloboma.
The problem with barrage is like it's a quite extensive area for me to barrage the whole thing, and it's quite coming close to the disc. So I didn't want to do that. And when for this patient, I didn't do surgery immediately. So this is after almost like 3-4 weeks when I started noticing that this started increasing. That's when I took them for the surgery.
Sir, actually, in certain cases, if you ask my personal opinion, I would rather observe in these cases, if the retina detaches, once the patient feels that his vision has come down, and then reoperating on him, once he gets back the vision, he'll be more happy. Because in these cases, it has went well now, but once you remove the gas or the oil, if it redetaches, then that is what is, it's become difficult to answer these patients because they will not understand the intricacies of the complications they have.
The problem here is vision loss is not just because of the RDs. He has a CNVM that's also causing vision loss.
And I think adding to Dr. Srinivas's point, the localized detachment of over staphylomas are known to be static. And another thing which we have observed is even when you are repeatedly injecting these eyes with some traction or localized barrage detachments, somehow detachments are quite stable. If you remember, CAT and every study initially thought that injections can worsen VMT and other things, but there is very little evidence to suggest. So, but yes, I think you are the better judge because you are examining the patient and following.
This was not something which we noted before. So this is something which developed over a period of time. So that's when we decided, okay, if I know it is increasing, there is no point in waiting. So we have to do something. The only problem was whether to put in oil or gas. I was not sure.
Sir, but the another thing is, since it's a vitrectomized eye and if you put the oil, then again the intravitreal injection becomes a challenge.
That's a reason why I actually injected gas inside, not oil.
And
only plus point is that if we are lucky, he may not require too many injections. So that is the positive for this gentleman.
And then I think you can present your cases now.
There's one more I can show you. So this is another case where it was. This is the patient where it's a high myopia and we had an extensive detachment. So this is like what we were talking about. There's no macular hole. I tried putting PFCL and could not settle. Then I realized that there's a small slit break near here. Again, you see that that's a small break which was causing a detachment here. So for this case, there was no concern. So I actually drained everything and then actually put an oil inside in this patient. And I could do the laser also in this because I could see a pigmentation there. So I know that I'll get a scar. So I actually did a laser for this patient with an oil inside.
Dr. Rajiv, I mean, have you not tried using a glue like Mudit uses in these kind of folds close to the disc and all?
Even if he uses glue, it's not only the glue which works. He still does laser.
He still does laser. Okay.
The glue will take care of it only for a temporary period where you don't need to worry about the tamponade.
Maybe this because all these are slit breaks. Maybe they'll approximate during the 2 weeks that the glue is there. Maybe.
Possible.
Maybe next time I think it's worth trying. Don't you think so?
Yeah.
Although I have no experience of using glue in treatment as well.
You can try that.
Dr. Dipender, now you please go ahead with your cases.
Till Dr. Dipender sir uses, Rajiv sir, using the diode laser would be of any help, especially when it comes to the laser near the disc or the regular argon green laser?
Won't help much. So the main problem in this is they won't take up the pigment, the laser burn, and we might keep increasing the intensity. And then
not in this case. In any other case, if the break is near the disc, would you prefer using the diode rather than the yellow or the green?
No, nothing much. I'll just use green. Not a major issue, unless you're going to do an extensive laser.
Okay.
Dipender, unmute yourself, please.
This was a young male with bilateral nystagmus, bilateral coloboma, and one eye having a fresh detachment. And this was the second eye, and with PVR and star folds. We did lensectomy and peeling and everything, and then retinectomy. And as usual, many times these patients, if you do more than 180 degree, we landed up with this kind of macular fold. And this is the picture at 8 weeks, and then silicone oil started emulsifying. So at the time of silicone oil removal, I realized that the fold is significant enough, and there was a question in my mind that should I touch it or should I leave it? So I think question is open for all the panelists. Would you try to correct this kind of fold after retinectomy, and you have successfully reattached retina, and now you are silicone oil removal? Patient's vision was 3/60, but still I think there was a significant macular fold. Question to Dr. Srinivas.
Sir, I would have tried it only if it is a primary macular fold, sir, not in the secondary where you have done extensive retinectomy and these things. I would have, in the primary cases, I would have definitely, I have tried doing a macular detachment induction and then trying to use the PFO so that it irons out. And then you can drain the fluid back from the periphery. Or we can even do a macular detachment and just, if there is no break in the periphery, since you're using a 42 gauge, you don't have to laser it, and create a bullous kind of thing over the macular area and then use the tamponade. That also have tried.
Thank you. Dr. Rajiv, your take?
See, we need to see what's the reason for the fold here is. If it is only a membrane which is pulling it, then yes, doing an ILM, peel and ERM might help to a certain extent. But if it is because of the rotation of the retina, sometimes the rotation also can cause the fold like this. In that case, just peeling an ILM would not help.
Yeah. So would you, I think, consider correcting it, or would you just leave it alone and be happy with the whatever visual and anatomical outcome the eye has achieved?
I would not do too much if it's a rotation because then you have to cut the retina, then rotate it back a little. That's then it's an extensive surgery. I would not do it. But if it's an ERM and ILM peeling, yes, that is definitely something which we can try.
Right. So I think this was on maybe on the rare occasion where I tried to peel the ILM, and first step was this only, that get rid of the ILM and see how it behaves. And then exactly what Dr. Srinivas was suggesting, taking a 41 gauge needle and was close to arcade. In video, it looks like that I'm very close to fovea, but I was almost 2 disc diameter from fovea. And because of the folding and displacement, I could relieve it partially. So I created another bleb inferiorly. This also could not get rid of the fold because the maximum folding was at the inferior border of the optic disc. So I created a extra this retinotomy, this time the bigger one, to just see if I can manipulate the retina inferiorly. And with all this, surprisingly, the fold has reduced substantially. Patient vision definitely improved, but yes, architecture is not looking very great. So this was just to share. Any comments from you, Dr. Reddy, on this?
No, Deepinder, is a good thing. I mean, suppose you did a retinotomy pretty close. I mean, if the do you think if there is a bigger retinal detachment, doing a peripheral retinotomy also would have given a same result? Induce a larger detachment and doing a retinotomy in the
Yes. I was actually hesitant because then you have to use silicone oil, and the child was not very cooperative with positioning also. So I used just gas in this case after I repaired this macular fold. If I would have induced a bigger detachment, I would be very hesitant to leave gas. So that was the reason I was aspirating the SRF also, because I knew the child is not going to make take the position.
Very excellent outcome. Yeah.
Great. Very nice.
So I think this case number 2 is interesting as well as little perplexing. This gentleman, diabetic patient, had a history of vision loss and followed by a vitrectomy done elsewhere. And he says there was no visual recovery. And since then, I think for last 2 months, there were very severe hypotony and total cataract. And when I examined him, the PR was inaccurate 3 quadrants, and ultrasound looked like this. And you see anterior segment has not been touched, and it looks like mature cataract. But surprisingly, retina was quite stiff, so it was not mobile on ultrasound, and you could see a subretinal shadow here, which was a little surprising. And I was suspecting that it can be something like IUL or something. But once you see this absolutely clear anterior segment, then you are actually not prepared that what can be this. Any guesses, Dr. Srinivas, what can be this?
Yes.
On a, yeah, let's hope that's easier for us to manage. So I fixed the cannula and routine vitrectomy part. The surprising thing again was the lensectomy was very fast and there was actually no nucleus. And I could see a large break here, another one close to this with rolled edges, and a smaller iatrogenic break here also, which was again a chronic older break. So we started peeling, and then I'm putting this PFO. And then I realized that this is a nucleus floating in subretinal space. So how will you plan to remove it, Dr. Rajiv?
So it has gone through something, right?
It has gone through that break.
So you have to get it. So looking at the retina, you may end up doing a retinectomy. Then I would say just make a retinectomy and then fold it and put a PFCL so that retina will not flap into your phragmatome. Looks more like a hard lens, so you may have to use a phragmatome. And if not, then you're lucky. So you may have to do a retinectomy.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Initially, I was thinking that I might get away with retinectomy. So I planned to manipulate it through the break, through which it has gone down. But again, this was not the right hand. So I changed my hand, and then took it out, and again I've initiated the peeling before I put, and then I think somehow I am comfortable with this. ultimately I had to do retinectomy.
So that's what I was saying. Looking at the retina, you might end up doing retinectomy. If you do it in the beginning, you'll be more peaceful to get that done.
Yeah, I agree. I thought all those manipulations were not necessary. So second question is, how do you prevent, folding in retina or displacement of retina when you do, larger retinectomies, more than 180-degree or?
So what I usually do is I don't cut the whole retina continuously. I leave small tags in place between the retinectomies which we do, so that it keeps the retina in place. It's like what we usually call it as a postal stamp type of picture, where you leave the small tags, and once you have a PFCL, everything stable, then I connect them and then clear it off, make it larger retina.
That's a good idea, but wouldn't they tent up because of the traction?
That's why I don't fill it up completely. You keep the PFCL to a little and keep the posterior retina in place, and then start cutting the retina all around and leave those tags. And even those tags are diathermized. So if moment the tension becomes more, they give up actually.
Right.
They don't keep the retina in position like that. The moment you start injecting the PFCL, they itself will break.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think great tip. Any comment from you, Dr. Reddy, to prevent this folding? I normally do this. I just reposition it with a soft tip. And one thing I have realized is that keep it there for some time. And then do maybe more than 3-4 rows of laser, and you have to do it repeatedly. I think repositioning retina, it tends to. But
when laser is done, it tends to slip posterior. You have
course.
to pull it again. Yes.
Yeah, so of course, I think we were lucky this time. There were not much of folding, and you can see retinal architecture not very healthy, but at least folds are not there. So next case is again a 7-year female repaired corneal perforation, and she was operated for traumatic RD with lensectomy and silicone oil by one of my colleagues, and then it was planned for silicone oil removal with or without IUL. Now I know this is 7-year girl. I'm making a port at, but just watch where I'm making the port, and I'm removing the emulsified oil. There is oil in anterior chamber also. And when I got rid of this, I realized that I have some unexpected intruder in anterior chamber. And yes, it has typical branching pattern. And so what next? Dr. Srinivas, how will you proceed?
It looks more like a retina, sir.
Yes,
And,
it's retina.
It's retina. Then definitely I would put the infusion in the anterior chamber first, and then try to flatten it, increase the pressure. If it's not settling with 30, then do it with 60, and then try to do it. If all of these fails, then we can always do an external drainage and try to drain it. But my first instance would to go in through AC.
Great. And anything different from this, Dr. Rajiv?
Oh, that's a best idea. So stop that infusion and maybe remove that infusion cannula, and then put an anti-chamber maintenance. That would help.
Dr. Reddy, why did this happen? Any guesses at this stage?
Most likely there was an anterior PVR causing pull, and the cannula has gone in.
Yeah. So I think I think I agree with all the points. So I did exactly same what my co-instructors have told. Once I realized that this is retina.
But one thing, Rajiv sir, when he put the first trocar, we could see some oil coming through. So when oil is coming through, then there has to be a connectivity with the vitreous cavity.
I'll tell you what happened. I'll tell you. But you have made a very good point that if you see oil coming, that means at least cannula was not subretinal to start with. That's a very good point.
The possibilities would have gone through and through the retina, then that would have.
So, and my colleague has informed me that because of emulsification, I was not able to evaluate retina preoperatively much. But he has told me that there is a band. And actually, what has happened is there was a band going from disc and spanning out to the site of the perforation, something like a vitreous incarceration, which probably was not relieved during first surgery. And so ultimately now I realized that, and I used air after BSS is because I was still not getting enough space. Air was not, BSS was not good enough to push retina behind. I'm using a scissor to cut this band. This was not, I am not able to cut it with cutter. So I'm using to cut scissor. And then I am now creating another inferior nasal port for infusion, because this anterior segment infusion creates corneal folding. And now with PFO in place, I am examining that what wrong has happened with the indentation. And I'm just exploring this band, the stump of this band, that whether it will lead to any traction on macula, but I realize it is too thick to be peeled off. And then I realized that there was a break here in the site of incarceration. And most likely that band, as oil was being removed, that incarceration, vitreous incarceration probably, pulled the retina and cannula became subretinal. That's the defect through which.
So the cannula was not subretinal to start with. It progressed.
Yes. So I think the moral of the story, I in retrospect, I realized I should have not created infusion right at the site of perforation, which we normally not do, but somehow this was a mistake I should have done here. We could have easily avoided this. Any comments from you, Dr. Reddy? And do I have time for fourth, or should I skip? Reddy, you are keeping the time, so let me know.
Yes. I think we'll ask Dr. Joshi to present his cases and then present.
Sure. So maybe meanwhile you can comment on this subretinal from.
Okay. Once again, thank you, Rajarami Reddy sir, for giving me the opportunity. So I'll be presenting this case. Actually, I was told to show the cases of the pneumatic retinopexy and its complication. I'll show one case here. So this was the case actually who came with a simple retinal detachment in the supratemporal quadrant. And I thought of injecting SF6. I'm a fan of SF6 because that's what I have been doing in my fellowship in Toronto, and with Dr. Peter Curtis, who was also a very fan of using SF6. So it was a very straightforward pneumatic retinopexy case. I went ahead and did it. But unfortunately, this is what I could see the next day. There was multiple fish eggs. In second day. Second day, there was multiple fish eggs. Then I thought, okay, something has gone wrong. Now I have to go inside and let me see what has happened. I thought it is only in the vitreous cavity. So once I went inside, you could see this. I had to take off all these bubbles. He was a phakic patient. And you can see the retinal detachment, in fact, enlarged. It was a very sectoral to begin with. And I had to put a PFCL because I was not getting any space to cut it. And then I went ahead and did a vitrectomy. So I thought, let me coalesce these bubbles into one, because that was pretty much an irritating factor to me. So what I was doing is try to do multiple fluid air exchanges so that let these bubbles coalesce into one, and I can remove it once together. And now you can see I am doing a peripheral base shaving, but I can see a lot of fish eggs underneath the retina also. So I thought, let me tease it, or I thought it will come out with multiple fluid air exchanges. It keeps pushing to the hole where I have created it in the dependent part. So most of these things I could get through the original break itself. Then I did a complete base shaving. Again, I had to do a fluid air exchange in between. I thought these nasal bubbles also will come out, but it didn't. Sorry, this temporal came out And this was the original break, what you are seeing there. And the nasal one was not coming out at all in spite of these procedures. So I had to do a small retinotomy at that site and drained away these things, these small tiny bubbles. I'd never seen so many tiny bubbles happening through one large SF6 bubble. So finally I thought, okay, everything went well. And I checked for any peripheral breaks. It was still going well. I finally closed the case doing a fluid air exchange and put a silicone oil. Anything differently would have been done by other panelists, or what might be the cause for this fish eggs?
Well, I don't think we generally do. What is the configuration of the RD for this pneumatic
It
retinopathy?
was just a supratemporal RD.
Uh-huh.
It was not involving the macula.
Okay.
So in fact, I had done around 150 cases during my 1.5 year of fellowship, because there in North America, the first choice is they don't get the OR time. So the first choice is to do pneumatic retinopexy in these simple cases.
Dr. Srinivas, did you notice fish egging on table also, or was it like
No.
single bubble?
It was 2 bubble when I injected it. Then I asked him to sleep one position, and I actually teased it to make it 1 bubble, but it was not happening. Then I thought over the time it will happen. I asked him to go home. He's a localite. I asked him to go home and come back and maintain the position. What I do is I call them back
Maybe
after
I
2
think
days.
you need to complain your municipal for roads or something. He must have had a jerky ride, or it's very surprising. You should report it. That if you have recorded that those 2 single bubbles, and then that much fish bagging have to happen overnight, or maybe if we went on a roller coaster or something.
Any jerky ride should actually coalesce the bubbles, right?
Exactly.
Rather than making it multiple bubbles.
Rajiv sir, any comments of yours?
Yes, if once the bubble is there, it's very difficult for it to become multiple unless there is some traction which is causing it to go behind the break. Other than that, I don't see any reason why it has gone even subretinal.
Yeah. So let's see the next part of the story. Now this is, I put a, sorry. So I put the silicone oil, and after 1 month, this is the picture. Just in 3 weeks, I could see multiple bubbling of the oil. And my colleague, Dr. Giriraj, has named it as the oil and gas, the bubbling story. So I went ahead. Now you can see multiple emulsification. So there was the posterocapsular, so PSC was also there, posterosubcapsular cataract. So I went ahead and did a Rexus and did a phacoemulsification also. I'm just fast forwarding this part. And I implanted a CT Lucia lens. I always prefer to put a suture while doing it, and I started removing the silicone oil. Now you can see this what is diamond-like appearance of this silicone oil, multiple diamonds. And then I did a multiple fluid air exchange in this case. You can see the silicone oil droplets also. I had to do 3 or 4 times to remove these droplets. And I went ahead and did an ILM peel in this case. So I thought at least now the things are solved. Sorry. The next day, the air which I saw, that also bubbled up. You can see this is just the air. The air also started bubbling. Finally,
You should ask him what is he doing.
You can see the last picture.
Srinivas, I am sorry to, can you show the fundus picture? Was there an optic pit also?
Yeah, I thought about it, sir, but there was no communication.
And did you check the batch number of your gas and what happened to other patients who were injected with same gas?
That day we did 8 surgeries. The same oil was used. The oro silicon oil was
Oh.
used in all these cases.
The gas was the culprit because it started the whole thing, whole chain of events. If it, you know, if it was contaminated, then everything else is maybe result of that
Gas
only.
is the normal canister gas what we are using for all the patients. I use the same thing, and in fact, it was a fresh which I had to do it in OPD because we do this pneumatic retinopexy in the OPD based procedure in a semi-sterile room where we give the intravitreal injections. So it was done there. It was not done in the OR also. And
I think I can quickly add one more comment that we were at one point of time try to analyze the emulsification rates in different patients. So it was suggested that biochemical environment inside eye also makes it a difference. So maybe you can investigate him for cytokines and other things. He has some emulsifying markers in his vitreous.
It could be that the PIT and probably CSF communication that has altered environment and making it bubbling.
no, sir. When I did the first time, when we did the pneumatic retinopexy, we thought that there is an ODMP, but there was no optic disc pit maculopathy, ODPM. There was no optic disc pit maculopathy. We thought of that because if it was an optic disc pit maculopathy, when I did an OCT, because it was only a shallow supratemporal quadrant RD, it would have picked up in the OCT. It did not.
Oh, simply not an optic disc pit. Maybe some communication with the CSF that altered the vitreous environment, making it bubble.
Might be, sir. I don't know. Might be because there has to be some reason why it is causing like this. Anything, gas I put it bubbled, oil I put it bubbled, air lastly, after removing the silicone oil, when I put fluid air exchange, air also started bubbling. And this is the final picture. Everything went well. Now he's having 612 vision. Okay, if not, then I'll go to my last one. This was another case, a retained intraocular foreign body. And this was a pretty large thing. It was almost stuck. It was encapsulated kind of thing. So I had to relieve it from the membranes. And you see the point where it is stuck there it was incarcerated. The retina was incarcerated at that point. So I had to do a bimanual surgery to remove that. And I could get rid of the foreign body. And in between, the patient started complaining of pain. So I went ahead and gave a subtenon lignocaine injection. So things were going fine. A patient was complaining. So I gave a subtenon lignocaine injection. Once I go inside, there was a choroidal detachment. So I thought I will try to drain it, but let me try to pick that membrane. So I was very much curious about what was happening there beside the disc. It was incarcerated retina there, but in 3 minutes, it went into kissing choroidals. Yes, anything at this point, sir? I checked the infusion. Infusion was pretty much in place. Okay, due to lack of time, I'll just go ahead. The second surgery was done after 7 days once the choroidal settled down, but unfortunately with extensive PVR. So again, a chandelier was used. There, that is the place where the retina was stuck in the choroid. So there are a lot of attempts were made to relieve that release the incarcerated retina, but it was not possible. The peripheral membranes we started dealing with. And finally, retina settled well after doing a retinectomy at that site. So fluid air exchange and silicone oil was injected. And the retinectomy edge was lasered. A patient is reasonably doing good with 1/60 vision. I think I'll stop here because of lack of time. Yes, sir. Any comments? Why it happened? Because I checked the infusion was pretty much in place. Just because of that subtenon injection and the moment I went inside,
Dr. Rajiv made a very good point that if you first thing you do is check the infusion, and if you feel it's suprachoroidal infusion, shift it to the other port. And
That's what I did, sir. I checked as soon as I went inside. The first thing I did was to check the infusion, and infusion was still in the vitreous cavity.
and if it's in the vitreous cavity, then it's more likely to be suprachoroidal hemorrhage, and you have to shut down everything, forget the membranes and other things, raise the infusion pressure, close the ports, and keep the chamber closed. If you rarely you can actually drain these fresh suprachoroidal hemorrhage. I could do it on one occasion, but next two occasions when I tried, it was not coming. So better is to wait and follow them.
Yeah, I waited, sir. 7 days I waited, but the waiting was pretty much with the penalty that he developed a grade D PVR.
I agree. Actually, to be very honest, one of the cases I thought I'll try to intervene early. Challenge is these patients have 360-degree suprachoroidal hemorrhage. Even if you use TPA, how much you will use and how many quadrants you will put is still a question.
Sir, it was not hemorrhage. It was detachment.
Okay.
It was not hemorrhage because it resolved in 7 days.
Okay.
Very unlikely that the suprachoroidal hemorrhage will resolve within 7 days. There was no hemorrhagic part here. So one possibility when we discussed with other of the colleagues is whether injecting it, because the retina was incarcerated at that point and I was trying to pick it open because multiple times. So whether that opened up and
yeah, there must be
something on injection went into it and caused the suprachoroidal detachment is one of the theory which I can think of, sir.
Yeah, I think it's a choroidal detachment probably precipitated by the dissection of that membrane around the foreign body. That's what make it up. I think overall, I think such a massive suprachoroidal detachment, the best thing would be to close the case and then take it up for another day.
Yeah. Because until it became kissing choroidal, because initially I thought I will drain it. I knew that it was not a hemorrhagic detachment because it happened immediately after the injection. So I thought I'll just go drain and do a suprachoroidal drainage and try to remove it and go ahead. But I didn't realize that it would cause an oppositional like kissing choroidal.
If your cannula is inside and there is a choroidal detachment, suspect only suprachoroidal. I would not suspect a serous choroidal detachment at that time.
But do you think, sir, within 7 days, the suprachoroidal hemorrhagic detachment will resolve?
It does, if it's not too much of a hemorrhage.
In such cases where it is a kissing choroidals also?
Did you do a scan immediately?
I did a scan. The scan was not showing any hemorrhagic kind of reflectivity inside.
Dr. Srinivas, sometimes it's combination, serous and hemorrhagic both. Actually, it initiated by serous and then, it hemorrhagic gets precipitated. So serous part can resolve very fast.
Yeah.
And when we were seeing your resurgery video, some amount of mound was, still there. You were like lasering over that mound. So it can be combination also, but it's difficult to say. You are the better judge because you have seen it live.
Correct. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for all your
Well, I think, should we stop now, Mr. Jinal Doshi?
I think it's time.
Yes, sir.
He's waiting for us to stop.
No, sir, nothing like that. I'm so sorry, but we're bounded with time.
I'd like to thank all the panelists, Dr. Dipender, Dr. Joshi, and Dr. Rajiv Reddy for your valuable time and collecting all the cases. Also, all the participants. I see there were some participants in this IC. It's a pleasure to see so many people. Thank you all. I think we all learned a lot from each other today, and hopefully whoever has seen have gained something from this. We hope to meet again some other day. I think. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Raja, sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Rajiv, sir. Thank you, Dipender, sir. Bye-bye. Take care.